Crop subsidies in the Farm Bill. We've all been told they're the reason that U.S. farmers grow so much corn, soy, and other bulk commodity crops. But when you zoom in and look at how farm finances actually work, subsidies don't explain as much as folks think. So in this video, I'm going to talk about another important reason that U.S. farmers do grow so much corn, soy, wheat, and so on. To really know why U.S. farmers do what we do, we have to look at who we are and what our whole money situation is. I did a whole video on this, but to catch everybody up real quick, over 95% of U.S. farms are family farms. We have a very strong folklore of family farms as poor and struggling, but in reality, family farmers in the U.S. have been out earning non-farmers every single year since 1993. I know that can sound really surprising, so check out that earlier video if you want. We go through the data. Here today, we're going to talk about some more realities of agriculture today that will also sound counterintuitive, but actually explain a lot. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I will try and cover it in another video, and subscribe so you don't miss it. For today, I'm going to talk about two things. Number one, how did this happen? How did we go from the poor family farmers of yore to farmers out earning non-farmers pretty consistently across the board? And how does that help us make sense of what's going on here in agriculture? First, how did we get here? How did we get to farmers out earning non-farmers in the US? This has two big causes. One, wage stagnation. Real wages in the US stopped growing in the late 20th century. And that's pushed down most Americans' incomes. It's a lot easier for farmers to catch up and out-earn non-farmers when the wages aren't good across the board. Second, consolidation. The big story of U.S. agriculture in the 20th century was the poorest farmers getting pushed out. Well, when you take the poorest people out of any group, who's left? The least poor people in that group. U.S. agriculture has always had an upper crust of wealthier families, and during consolidation, they were way more likely to either keep their land or be the ones who were accumulating it as the poorer farmers went out of business. Farmers that kept their land into the 21st century are way more likely to be the kind of family and household and estate that can afford bad years. There's often multiple streams of income. It could be other businesses, rental properties. Most family farmers today also have day jobs, even when the farm earns enough that they can't afford to quit. And that's how most family farmers now actually tend to out-earn non-farmers in the US, if you compare both groups as a whole. Second, let's talk about how knowing this helps make sense of what's going on in agriculture. And that includes, why is there so much corn and soy getting grown? So to figure this out, let's start somewhere a little unexpected. Small and family farms do tend to lose money most years. That is true. And this figure is often used as a reason that these farms need financial support. But what if we looked at their overall financial situation? If we do that, we can see that most of these small and medium-sized farmers are not living in poverty. At the costs of living you get in most rural and ex-urban areas, you can absorb the $1,000 to $2,000 of losses per year that's typical for this group. And we'll talk more about mid-sized family farms because, yeah, there's some different stuff going on there. Just bear in mind that as the lowest income farmers, they're still working with way more net worth than Americans at large. And that also still helps explain some things. Now, can you guess what households that have some extra wealth tend to get into? Tax shelters. And farms can be very effective tax shelters. So let's talk about what a tax shelter is. Imagine you're making more money than you need, so you want to invest it. People doing this usually want to pay as little taxes as possible. So you're looking for investments that are good investments, but also the income they produce gets taxed less than usual. And those investments are called tax shelters. This is a very crude summary, but you get the idea. And you know what's a really effective tax shelter? Farmland. Why is that? It's because we spent the last century making farm policy to save farmers. A lot of that Save the Farmers policy wasn't in the Farm Bill at all. It was tax breaks for farms at the federal, state, and local level. The big one is property tax breaks. If you own real estate, you usually pay property tax on it to the city or the county to support local services like schools, roads, and emergency response. But if your real estate is a farm, most states give big property tax breaks for farms, because asking farms to pay the same property tax rates as a mall doesn't really make sense for a few reasons. Sounds great, right? We saved farms. Except here's what really happened. The minute you put tax breaks on farmland, now it's a tax shelter. And farmland already has big perks compared to other investments. Real estate with buildings needs constant maintenance. You're dealing with a lot of tenants. But farmland, relatively low maintenance. You can rent a lot of it to just one tenant. And you can even put a pretty little country home on it if you want to. And when you add tax breaks on top of that, it is a very appealing investment asset. These tax breaks were supposed to save family farms. But thanks to the law of unintended consequences, these tax breaks are like a bat signal for everybody who wants to invest in something and get some tax breaks. So if you've heard scary stories about Bill Gates and hedge funds and foreign investors buying up all the US's farmland, this is why. In the name of saving family farmers, we turned U.S. farmland into a global tier tax-sheltered real estate investment asset. That demand has helped push up U.S. farmland prices to record highs that often price working farmers right out. As far as I can tell, this price surge is way out of proportion with any real long-term growth in demand for food, crops, livestock. Instead, and again, I'm not a financial professional, I'm just a farm professional. In my opinion, it looks to be driven mostly by demand from people who want to buy farmland itself as a tax-sheltered real estate investment. So here's another fun part. With all the news about big investors buying up US farmland, you'd think they'd own all of rural America by now. But no. To this day, most US farmland is still owned by family farms. And why is that? Because remember, today's American family farms are mostly financially comfortable people who also enjoy the tax advantages that come with owning farmland, and they're not going to give it up that easily. The demand for farmland as an asset is very high, but lots of the people who own it are not selling because they also enjoy having a tax-advantaged real estate asset. Small-scale artisanal tax sheltering. The fact that so many U.S. farms are largely tax shelters actually explains a lot of things in our farm sector that otherwise just wouldn't make any sense. It explains how we've been hearing about consolidation and how small farms can't make money and they've been getting pushed out for over a century. But at the same time, about 90% of U.S. farms are still small family farms. That's because small family farms are a lovely, accessible tax shelter for the middle and upper middle class. I've had friends who are dentists and lawyers say things like, yeah, you can only make so much money before your accountant tells you you should buy some farmland. You can have a nice little property that you kind of farm, lose a little money on, and still come out way ahead on taxes and real estate appreciation. The number of small farms in the US has actually grown in the last 20 years, and that's, I think, where a lot of it is coming from. This also explains why it's medium-sized family farms that are struggling the most financially. With a medium-sized farm, you don't have the wealth to really scale up, rent thousands of acres from your neighbors, or get dozens of chicken houses built on your property, and really be competitive as a large-scale commercial farm. But you're also too big to farm at a loss. Most day jobs just do not make enough money to absorb the losses that a medium-sized farm could get into, the way you can do with a small operation. A lot of farms are mostly tax shelters, also helps explain why so much of our food comes from just a few large-scale farms. It's not just that a few farms got really big, it's also that there are a lot of farms in the US that aren't really growing that much, even for their own use. The single biggest chunk of US farms are those that don't sell anything at all, and they cannot be explained by self-sufficient homesteads. We have data on how much farm households use things they raise themselves, and it's low enough that there is no possible way that homesteading explains this large number of zero-sales farms. Tax sheltering is the most likely explanation. Tax shelters can also help explain the forced-to-have-a-day-job phenomenon. Most US farmers have a day job. I'm one of them. Some US farmers do make enough money on the farm that they and their spouses can both afford to quit and farm full-time, and a surprising number of them just don't. They keep the day job. When I first saw that, I could not make sense of it because, like most people, I just knew that quitting your job and farming full-time was the dream. But if you look at farms as a tax shelter, that behavior clicks into place. A whole lot of people are using farms as a way to take highly taxed job income and turn it into tax-sheltered capital gains income on their real estate. Rather than competing for time and attention, the day job and farm are complementary. Of course you don't quit your day job. Why would you have a tax shelter without having income to put into it? That would be nuts. Last but not least, this video was supposed to be about corn, soy, and monoculture. So how does a lot of farms are tax shelters explain why there's so much corn, soy, and other bulk crops getting grown in the US? Well, farmland tax breaks only apply to farmland. So what do you have to do to get it to count as farmland? Farm it. Or you get someone else to pay you rent, so they farm it and you collect the tax breaks. That's another option. And if you're farming for tax breaks, a lot of the time you're going to do the bare minimum that it takes to qualify, right? You're going to grow something real simple to grow and sell. And you know what corn and soybeans and other bulk crops are? Really simple to grow and sell. I never want to say easy because nothing in agriculture is ever easy, but in much of the eastern US, corn and soy are as close to plant it and walk away as it gets. So depending on your location, your simplest thing to grow might be wheat, hay, sorghum, grazing cattle, something like that. For people who have family farmland and rent it out to someone else to farm, that land usually still winds up growing the most straightforward bulk crops like corn, soy, hay, wheat, cattle, etc. Farming for tax breaks sounds like a joke, but it's big business in the US. Once you account for how farms are a great tax-sheltered real estate investment vehicle, most small and medium-sized family farms suddenly go from losing money to profitable. Tells you something, doesn't it? This is a big underrated part of why the US keeps growing so much corn, soy, and other bulk commodities. In my opinion, it's really not federal subsidies or crop insurance taking the lead on that, and it's not supply and demand either, at least not supply and demand for crops. A big driver behind an awful lot of US agriculture is supply and demand for tax breaks. There are so many property owners in this country who are willing to farm around break even or even at a loss just to collect tax breaks on real estate. And that explains a lot about US agriculture. That's it for today.